Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. All right, so feedback is greatly important. Feel free to reach out to me either through email, Substack, and all of those things will be provided for you in this episode. So, with some of the audio platforms that I'm on my speaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, these are just to name a few. So, this is the continuation about American literature. So I'm going to go in the era in which the establishment of the 13 colonies was existing. So I'm going to go into depth about stuff like that. And I'm, of course, going to give my point of view about it. Here we go. Okay, so here is an AI-generated response to literature in America during the 1700s. So American literature during the 1700s was characterized by a blend of colonial, revolutionary, and Enlightenment influences. So I'm going to add on to this. So, this makes a whole lot of sense when you think about Thomas Paine. You think about the aspects of that... The aspects of this period in time in which we had the division between the red coats here, and we had the division between the colonization of establishing everything in America, with that Paul Revere, it says iconic implement of this time in history. The British are coming. And so, we have a lot of people revolting against the tyranny of the British government and of the monarchy. And aspects of that where in Britain it was not a say of people's personal liberties. And then you really had to fight like hell, so to speak, in order to establish that liberty. And so, all these things are quite prevalent in the aspects of the literature that was being produced at this time. And so the aspects of the Poor Richard's Almanac. And then I'll explain on to this with Benjamin Banneker with his almanac. So Benjamin Banneker is another great example of the narrative being disproven. So I learned about Benjamin Banneker when I was in the 8th grade. And it was quite interesting in his contributions that he gave in his time. So, he happened to be African American, and he was very well versed and very affluent in the aspects of agriculture. And he contributed just as much, and then he had a unique perspective about the aspects of the contributions of what and how to move in the almanac of Benjamin Banneker's almanac of how to move about in the agricultural aspects of farming and producing and everything else. And, you would think that, okay, this is a time of division, real division. How could he have a say? But he did. And that's quite fascinating. That's impactful, and that's empowering, and that's inspiring to take on and to think about in the aspects of other generations, because I definitely thought about that in that sense, that's very inspiring that he was able to have that sort of opportunity, and that's great. So Benjamin Franklin, Poor Richard's Almanac, and the way to wealth The Way to Wealth were influential, offering practical advice and reflecting his wit and wisdom. He also wrote the autobiography, which had been reprinted numerous times and is considered one of the most influential memoirs in American literature. All right, going on to Thomas Paine. His pamphlet, Common Sense, 1776, was pivotal in persuading colonists to declare independence from Britain. Additionally, his series of essays, The Crisis from 1776 to 1783, bolstered American morale during the Revolutionary War. So, Phyllis Wheatley, as the first African American to publish a book of poetry, her works such as On Being, Brought from Africa to America, and To the Right Honorable William, Earl of Dartmouth, showcased her poetic talent and individuality. So Jonathan Edwards, known for his fiery sermons during the First Great Awakening, Edwards' works like Sinners in the Hand of the Angry God reflected the revival of Puritan faith in the 1730s and 1740s. Going on to James Madison, co-author of the Federalist Papers, who supported the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. Madison's contribution, just as the Federalist Number 110, addressed political factions and the importance of checks and balances. All right, so these works and authors significantly shaped the early American literary landscape, reflecting the nation's political, social, and religious transformations during the 1700s. Now, I'm going to go into more details and depth. Here we go. Okay, so what are my thoughts about particularly during this era of the colonization, really colonization area of literature? I think it is that, can't stress it enough, it is what makes this country what it is, essentially. Think about it like this, okay? Now, these particularly people who were coming from England, and then now I'm going to get to the other aspects of everything, but particularly let's focus on this and then, go from there. So, we have the Founding Fathers. We have people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. We have people like Alexander Hamilton. We have people like Adams. We have people like, and the list goes on, people like them. Benjamin Franklin, of course. Now, what was their whole purpose for finding a new country, a new area, new territory to live and thrive and progress? They wanted to get out of and you can look at it in this case of exiting the danger zone from which they were living in, or exile from being captive in their native country of England. So in England, at that time and beyond and before then, England was all about rule and territory here. Now I'm simply speaking from my point of view about it. And so, you have figures like, players like Elizabeth, Mary, you get all the Tudors here, and then Henry the Eighth, and the list goes on. I think I'm mixing him up with. I'm mixing it up with literary figures, But my point being here is, essentially, the monarchy was the up tier in society, was notable. And if you go against the monarchy in any way, shape, or fashion, you will severely pay the consequences for that. Your life would just be a living hell. Because that's the order and the structure. You have to follow the rule of the monarchy. it's quite interesting how that goes along with making mockery of that, of God Save the Queen, where it says, well, from this point of view, well, to each his own. It seems like I'll be protective in the Queen, but, when the stuff hits the fan, hey, to each his own. I'm going to do what I need to do. It's one of those things. Now, that's how I interpret that, People from England and historian buffs, y'all, to the contrary, feel free to give me comments, and I'll have those links provided for you in this episode, as I always do. So, these things are something to really consider when we get into the literary aspects of what people were writing at the time. So most of the literature that was being produced at this time was from personal stories, personal attributes of what they were noticing, thinking, feeling, seeing. And of course, you get the influx of romanticism about that. With as the time passes on, with the passage of time with American literature, when we get Moby Dick and we get all these other literary works that come out and that are American produced. But for the most part, most of the things that were coming out, from a literary point of view at this time were pretty pragmatic. And in the sense of they were practical things to go about your means. And also a lot of political commentary about their society too. And then, how to move forward and how to make the republic people of the republic speaking and feeling free to be in a nation where you can speak your thoughts without, any kind of reputable repercussions, as I stated on Monday. And so, now the horrors and the cruelty and the aspects of slavery did exist at this time here. But you have to give credit where credit is due. You have to understand this, and that's unfortunate that there are people that still don't want to see this for what it is, America did have this horrible nightmare in society, but it was abolished. It was got rid of swiftly. And take note of that. Now, on the contrary of that, that's a different point of view about that. And, in certain companies, you get a frowny face on that here, trying to make light of this situation. But on all seriousness, for the aspects of going up north and seeking more aspects of freedom and more aspects of, economic growth and wealth for African Americans. That dream was, not all what was expected, because even though the North was, this whole thing, how even at that time, and then beyond, when we get into the aspects of the Industrial Revolutions and so forth, it's quite interesting how, word of mouth, PR imagery, marketing imagery, so to speak, of using tactics to use publicity and stating that, up north is a beacon for people to flourish and thrive. It's, enlightening. It's intellectually sound. People are far removed from prejudices. But that's far from the truth, and it wipes away from the aspects of humanity that's gonna follow you no matter where you go. And that's what minorities found, particularly in this case, in this instance, African Americans found when they went up north. And there was a lot of memoirs and tales about that too. Specifically when we moved towards and go into the Harlem Renaissance and everything like that. But before then, here, it's quite admirable that here we have former slaves, addressing, debating, and speaking about the aspects of slavery and the abolition movement going about and being advocates for that. And then when we get figures like Harriet Tubman and, with speeches like "Ain't I a Woman?" She's explaining that her place, that, I have the same disposition that any normal person would have. I want to be respected. So, and then I have value and I have worth, and this is my statement and these are my claims. And then, that's, again, when we dig down and we get a micro lens and really look at things for what they are, it will rule against the mainstream narrative of saying that, these poor minorities, they're so oppressed, they're so this. Look how horrible, That's not always the case here, And it is just proven time and time throughout history. You look back, you want to see it for what it is. If you want to see these things, it's there to prove that that's not, these horrible events have happened, but it's not always the case. There's silver lining. And there is some diplomatic reasons and cases for why things are so prosperous, were so prosperous, and, things are being more cohesive now. And why people still, even though, again, it's being presented that, America is just unsavory here. That's why people still want to come here, because of what? You have the freedom to live, to thrive if you choose to. But that takes, self-discipline and work and dedication. And of course, on the flip side of that, there are people out there and the powers that be, if they don't want to give you the opportunity, you just don't have it. But at least in America, you have the options to have other options. And that's pretty much the gist of my commentary behind all of these examples here. All right, so I am going to get into the rest of the facts about aspects of literature from this era. Here we go. All right, here we go. Here, I found, this is quite interesting what I found. So this is quite different from the other source, but I think this is even more details to, give you even more of a perspective of grasping everything about American literature, and particularly in the foundation of America from the 17th century. All right, so the history of American literature begins with the arrival of English-speaking Europeans in what will become the United States. So here we go with the aspects of people coming, exiling from England, getting on the Mayflower, Plymouth Rock, all of these things, and getting on the Mayflower, going to Plymouth Rock, landing on Plymouth Rock, that is, and then establishing out from that the 13 colonies. So at first, American literature was naturally a colonial literature, and then colonial literature. And we get about that aspect of, the Englishmen are writing from their point of view here. So who thought and wrote as such? So John Smith, a soldier of fortune, is credited with innating American literature. So his chief books included A True Relation of Virginia, 1608, and the General Historia of Virginia, History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles. So, although quite the contrary to the Disney depiction of John Smith, is bustling, smoldering, and the list goes on about that. But it's just quite unfortunate. But that's the whole thing with Disney. They, it's one of those things where you don't want to tell what they think is the truth about history, but in a way that is more aesthetically pleasing to children, to the general public. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Disney, even now and then when I was growing up, it's all about being a company that is in the counterculture or whatever. And within the counterculture, talking about it in a way that is supposed to be appropriate, I guess. Now, I would say this. I would say don't fantasize things. Fantasize things when it's appropriate to do so, for children. But, if you just talk about things that are appropriate but it's actually accurate, that's a whole lot more sound to do for a child. Because, again, that introducing and understanding how the world works, to a kid as early as possible. But you understand you have to be very gentle and understanding and patient, and know that you can't just be this transparent, off the mouth, just say whatever the heck you want to say to kids. You can be very censor what you're saying, but at the same time, actually educate. That's very helpful. All right. Although these volumes often glorify their author, they were written to explain colonizing opportunities to Englishmen. In time, let me turn that down. In time, each colony was similarly described. Daniel Denton's brief description of New York in 1670, William Penn's brief account of the province of Pennsylvania in 1682, and Thomas Ashe's Carolina in 1682 were only a few of many works praising America as a land of economic promise. So such writers acknowledge British alliance, but others stress the difference of opinion that spurred the colonists to leave their homeland. See what I'm saying? See what I mean by that? So more important, they argued questions of government involving the relationship between church and state. Now, the attitude that most authors attacked was jauntily set forth by Nathaniel Ward of Massachusetts Bay, and the simple cobbler of, forgive me for the pronunciation of that, I believe, Akawam in America. This was published in 1647. So Ward, seemingly, it's assumed that he was defending the status quo and railed at colonists who sponsored newfangled notions. So a variety of counter-arguments such to this, a conservative view, were published. So John Winthrop's journal, which was written from 1630 to 49, told sympathetically of the attempt of Massachusetts Bay Colony to form a theocracy, a state with God, and its head with its laws based upon the Bible. So later defenders of the theological idea were increased Mather and his son Cotton. So William Bradford's History of Plymouth Rock Plantation through 1646 showed his program as separatism, and it broke completely with Anglicalism. It's quite interesting with the aspects of how that, forms people with religion, either, accepting religion or wanting to go through new religious sects, the sext, finding not being spiritual, but not really wanting to join a sect or a congregation, and so forth. So later defenders of this theory showed how his Plymouth separatism broke completely, as I was saying. So even more radical than Bradford was Roger Williams, who, in a series of controversial pamphlets, advocated not only the separation of church and state, but also the vesting of power in people and the tolerance of different religious beliefs. So the utilitarian writing of the 17th century included biographies, treatises, accounts of voyages, and sermons. There were few achievements in drama or fiction, since there was a widespread prejudice against these forms. Bad but popular poetry appeared in the Bay Psalm Book of 1640 and in Michael Wigglesworth's summary in Dodgel's verse of Calvinistic belief. So the Day of Doom in 1662, there was some poetry, at least of higher order. So Anne Bradstreet of Massachusetts wrote some lyrics published in the 10th Muse lately, and also sprung up in America in 1650, which movingly conveyed her feelings concerning religion and her family. Ranked still higher by modern criticism, this is a poet whose works were not discovered and published until 1939. Wow. So Edward Taylor, an English-born minister and physician who lived in Boston and Westfield, Massachusetts, was less touched by gloom than the typical Puritan Taylor, who wrote lyrics that showed his delight and Christian belief in the experience. So again, these different depictions of life as they see it in America. So all 17th century American writers were in the manner of British writing of the same time period. John Smith wrote in the tradition of geographic literature. Bradford echoed the cadence of the King James Bible, while the Mathers and Roger Williams wrote bejeweled prose typical of the day. So Anne Bradstreet's poetic style derived from a long line of British poets, including Spenser and Sidney, while Taylor was in the tradition of metaphysical poets, as George Herbert and John Donne were both in the content and the content of the form of the literary of the first century in America as marked as English. So it's quite interesting with the aspects of all these things. Again, when we transition to the notion of modernity, of how these help to uplift the aspect of what we know as, modern literature. So, I'm going to go again to this aspect. And I spoke about this on one of my messages in a bottle that I upload and everything on Sundays. So, here's this. Now, I find it quite interesting that there are certain topics that you don't say or you don't talk about when you get into the aspects of the workplace or so forth, or and then even in the aspects of interpersonal relationships in certain companies, you can't just say what you want to say about a subject, or you have to censor yourself if you want to, because without any doing that because the other person might be offended or whatever. But when you get into the aspects of being politically correct or what have you, and then I just see it like this. What's wrong with just stating the obvious or being honest about something? Of course, you shouldn't go around being an ass about everything and being insensitive to how other people think and feel. But when you get into the aspects of, from the first point of censoring yourself without being yourself, what are you doing? Now, and then there's another aspect of this. It's quite interesting how, this is a testament to American spirit and the aspects of what makes America really powerful here. So when we get in the notion of religion and then when we get metaphysics, with sciences and everything else, and having those things in their own outlet, they speak about the notion of that there is room for people to have difference of opinions, and they can still have those opinions without any issues. Well, for the most part. And I think the Scopes trial really shook a lot of stuff up to where, people started to take more and more notice about the aspects of science and the aspects of religion and the aspects of the public school system and the aspects of how those things should be related and explained to children. So what do I mean by this? Now, the Scope trial, just to, give a quick explanation, and I'm sure, y'all know what I'm talking about, and then all that, or if I got younger viewers out there, if you don't know, here's a quick explanation. So, pretty much what it was is science teacher, he was explaining the aspects of evolution in the classroom. And now, without saying that didn't perceive very well, and with the aspects, it was painted as if, now that's not always the case with people who have Christian views or religious in the aspects of being opposed to other people's different opinions, but it didn't. It was the aspects of, science against religion, and then they're trying to find the medium of these things. Now, Scope was a person who believed in the aspects of science and the aspects of that science is in itself the pragmatic way to explain and to, salvage the way people move in their day-to-day or, their everyday lives here. But, it went on trial because the parents, and from what I understand, the parents and so forth and the school board didn't like that this was being taught to their children. They wanted to, again, have that aspect that religion is still, the accompaniment and the betterment of society and the betterment of these children's life, because, you need some moral compass here in order to have, and so these children can turn into productive citizens and have actual value and merit to society here. Now, it's one of those things like, from my point of view, out looking in, it's one of those things, everything is, most of the time, it's not black and white, not straightforward. You need to see different point of views in order to make a decision for yourself. And that's good for children to understand the aspects scientifically of how things work, and then understand and the aspects of how religiously things are seen and work, and how that is infused in society. And again, having all these figures, and in the going back now to end my point here, in the 17th century, you got very, very, very rudimentary, just useful literature that is about getting from day to day, or that is about political commentary, or that's about science. But you get towards the end, little droplets of literary art for the sake of art. But for the most part, everything was pretty much nonfiction here. And that, again, is a testament of the aspects of how and why American literature and so forth and American culture is vastly different than other cultures surrounding us and so forth, because there's an influx of so many different ideas, and people have the opportunity to be and play and say these things and showcase these things, and then revolve back to their heritage and say this is this and this is why I think, and they have the opportunities to do so. And that's very reflective and understanding to the aspects of the flourishment of America. But at the same time, to look on the other side of this, that could be the downfall, because again, there's no sort of, if everybody has something to say, nobody's saying nothing kind of mentality. There's got to be law and order. And then, we have that, but it's getting, and that was produced and have a strong foundation and structure for that. And then, we lost our way in recent years, but it's coming back. But that's something to also consider too. All right, I'd like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me through the links that I will provide for you. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. This is bye-bye for now. Take care.